questioning the Iran nuclear deal. Has the Obama administration been duped by Tehran? Also on today's program, they called her the mother of refugees. But has Merkel's migration policy come back to haunt her? And in Picture This, a moment of truth for Syria. As the conflict enters a sixth year, what's next for the war-torn country? Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. On July 14, 2015, history was made as the US and its allies signed a deal with Iran aimed at ending its nuclear program. 2 years in the making, it was hoped the deal would end decades of animosity and suspicion between Washington and Tehran. But now, 8 months later, suspicion is perhaps higher than ever, and some are continuing to question the merits of the deal. Supporters say the gains made by moderates in Iran's recent election show that the country is coming in from the cold. But recent missile launches by Iran has prompted critics to say that Tehran is acting provocatively and has hoodwinked the Obama administration. Today's Newsmaker is Iran, as we ask if the nuclear deal could cause more harm than good.
For decades, Iran has been a pariah of the West. The international community viewing its nuclear program as a serious threat to global stability.
Iran aggressively pursues these weapons and exports terror.
Iran poses a significant strategic threat.
The United States and the international community are determined to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons.
Iran's support for Syria's Bashar al-Assad has also positioned it against other global powers, which back the Syrian opposition. And Iran remains locked in a war of words with its biggest enemy, Israel.
Any nation that sticks up for Israel will achieve nothing but the world's hatred.
By fueling Iran's aggressions with billions of dollars in sanctions relief, it makes war more likely.
A groundbreaking deal last year, though, lifted sanctions on Iran in exchange for it curbing its nuclear ambitions. But now Iran has carried out ballistic missile tests, and again there are concerns about its real intentions. Ballistic missiles fired in a military drill in Iran. The country's official news agency says the tests are to show that Iran is ready to confront threats against it, and reportedly written on the missiles is a message that Israel must be wiped out. With a range of 2,000 kilometers, they are capable of hitting Israel and US bases in the Middle East. The tests have been criticized by the UN.
The Secretary General calls on the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran to act with moderation, caution, and the good sense not to increase tensions through hasty actions.
Iranian TV has also shown off the weapons storage facilities. Iran may say it doesn't want nuclear weapons, but Western and regional powers don't believe it, and images like this don't help to rebuild trust. In January, the US imposed sanctions on Iran due to a previous round of missile tests. And now France says Iran could face new sanctions. So why, after the nuclear agreement, has Iran risked damaging relations? In February, President Hassan Rouhani's message of re-engagement with the West saw reformists and moderates make big gains in elections. Many of those most loyal to the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, lost their seats in parliament. Some analysts say the missile tests reflect the divisions in Iran, arguing they are proof Khamenei still holds the most power. The nuclear agreement represents a profound change for the Middle East, with Iranians engaging in the world once more. And it's hoped that trade deals could ease tensions further. But the merits of the nuclear deal are still fiercely debated. Gulf countries and Israel have major concerns. And Iran's rival, Saudi Arabia, recently launched a huge display of its military capabilities. Some fear there could be a new arms race across the Middle East, leaving the long-term success of the nuclear deal open to question. Duncan Crawford, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to talk about whether Iran has duped the US over last year's nuclear deal is Sohrab Ahmari, editorial writer for the Wall Street Journal. He's in London, and in New York is Emad Kiyaei, Executive Director of the American-Iranian Council. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining us. Let's start with you, Emad Kiyaei. Is the nuclear deal causing more harm than good at this stage?
No, not at all. I think that what was signed in July and later on went into implementation in January is one of the most profound, important non-proliferation treaties ever signed between the world powers and Iran, that puts into place the most comprehensive transparency monitoring mechanisms that any country has given up its right to. So if we want Iran's nuclear program to remain peaceful, this deal is great. And the missile activities are a separate issue, and of course we will delve into that in the coming minutes.
Let's delve into it right now. Are you not uncomfortable at all, Emad, with Amir Ali Hajizadeh, the head of Iran's Revolutionary Guard's Aerospace Division, quoted in farce as saying that the test was aimed at showing Israel that Iran could hit it, that the missile range is to confront the Zionist regime, Israel is surrounded by Islamic countries and it will not last long in a war. It will collapse even before being hit by these missiles. That sort of stuff, along with the nuclear missile launch, are you cool with that?
No, of course. I mean, such comments do infuriate and the mistrust amongst Iran and its neighboring countries and even Israel. But let's not forget that the threat of Israel towards Iran has been ongoing and been going on for years. So if we want to counter that, we can just briefly mention the comments coming out of Netanyahu's office or himself calling on attacks on Iran and even proactively asking the United States and other countries to take out Iran's nuclear program. So this animosity is there, it will continue, but we should take it with a grain of salt and understand that this is rhetoric, this is bolstering, and it should be separated from what is really going on within Iran.
Okay, Sohrab, Ahmari, let's take this with a grain of salt. The White House, the State Department, and the Pentagon all say that the missile test doesn't violate the nuclear deal, so there's not too much to worry about. Sohrab?
Yeah, hi, absolutely not, Imran. I think this is, first of all, I want to address the question of Israel's rhetoric toward Iran. Israel and a lot of other countries in the region express concern and recommend courses of action with respect to Iran's nuclear weapons program. I think it's outrageous that Emad suggests that that's morally equivalent to when Iran's leaders say, for example, that, I'll say it in Persian, Israel bayad az safhe ruzegar nabud shavad, and similar rhetoric, which in English means Israel must be wiped off from the pages of time or from the pages of history, or wipe off the map is another way that it's commonly translated. That's a genocidal call. It's an incitement to destroy a nation state that is a member of the United Nations. It's a legitimate nation state, and the Iranian leaders routinely denounce it. And they put that into action by supporting Hezbollah and Hamas, which are designated terrorist organizations. And now they're having, they have the nuclear capability, or they're getting close to the nuclear capability, which they can then deliver with the ballistic missile testing that they've been doing.
To Emad's point, are they really threatening, or are they just trolling?
No, I think that these are serious threats, and I don't think any nation, be it Israel or the Gulf states in the region, can take a blasé attitude when one nation threatens to destroy another. And they're not just doing it just with ballistic missile testing or just with rhetoric. As I mentioned, the Iranian regime is the main sponsor of Hezbollah and Hamas, which are groups that are constitutionally, in their charters, committed to destroying Israel. And in the case of Hamas, they're committed to destroying Jewish people worldwide. It's not just limited to the state of Israel. So the Iranian regime has been doing this for a very long time, and obviously add to that every other kind of misbehavior that it does in the region, but whether it's sponsoring Bashar Assad's wholesale slaughter of its own people to the tune of 500,000 by some estimates, or its own domestic repression, taking hostage Iranian-American dual citizens. You have a malignant regime getting closer and closer to being a real power in the region that can threaten, not just Israel, but its other surrounding neighbors as well.
Okay, so Emad Kiyaei, has it been smart Iran versus naive believe America and Iran's the ultimate winner when it comes to all of this right now? Emad?
It's very surprising to hear Sohrab promote this fear-mongering as being done in some capitals in the West and also in the region in terms of understanding Iran's capabilities and realistically assessing it. Number one, this nuclear deal was a multilateral approach. It was done by the world powers, including the United States, with Iran, that spanned over 12 years, and the most comprehensive negotiations happened in the last 2 years. If Iran had a nuclear weapon, there would not be a nuclear accord. If Iran was pursuing and was so close to a nuclear weapon, then they would not put into place such instrumental and intrusive inspections within this nuclear deal that happened. So Iran is showing that, listen, we don't have nuclear weapons, and come and see. Every gram of Iran's fissile material is accounted for, and Iran's nuclear facilities are under the watchful eye of the United Nations nuclear watchdog, the IAEA. Even the IAEA itself reports that Iran is complying with the nuclear deal. So I want to make that very clear, that the only nation in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons is Israel. So we have to understand really the capabilities there. Now, just quickly, I just want to touch on Sohrab when he mentioned, again, look at the wordings. Iran's nuclear weapons program. Iran, at the moment, has a peaceful nuclear program. That is under international supervision. So, yes, I understand a missile program is a problem, and will address that. But in terms of Iran's posturing towards Israel or the regional countries, we must understand that these other countries have one of the most sophisticated military capabilities on a tune of billions of dollars. Saudi Arabia is the fourth largest buyer of United States military.
Let's take that point and pose it to Sohrab. Do the Saudis have justification? The Saudis, no friends of human rights in many ways. Lots of criticism of them, what they're doing in Yemen, what they do internally, etc. Do they have a case for flexing their muscle and arming themselves to the teeth and freaking out at what Iran's doing? I mean, President Obama said in that very revealing interview with Jeffrey Goldberg, his suggestion was that the Saudis and the Sunni Gulf allies should get used to sharing the region with the Iranians. Should the Saudis and others get used to that idea, or do they have a justification for arming themselves to the teeth?
Well, I think, look, precisely because Saudi Arabia is in many ways a dysfunctional state. It is, as you pointed out, as a human rights violator. There's no denying that. But there are all these other actors in the region, from Turkey to Egypt to the United Arab Emirates. Not all of them are perfect states, but all of them are concerned about Iran's activities, and the nuclear program is just one dimension of it. It's the sponsoring of Shiite militias to destabilize countries right on Saudi Arabia's doorstep in Yemen. It's the long-term colonialization, really, of Lebanon and transforming it into an Iranian proxy state that has long irritated the states in the region. And the point isn't to defend the behavior of every one of these other states. The point is that because the United States, under the Obama administration, has struck a flawed nuclear deal, which the Iranian regime is already less than a year flirting with violating it, whether through ballistic missile tests and also it's just general aggression in the region, humiliating the U.S. sailors and so forth, that the other actors in the region, which aren't pleasant actors, will begin to get nervous, and they will take their own steps. So the Saudis will want to develop their own nuclear weapons program. I've sat across the table from Saudi officials, military and political, who have said we can easily buy one.
Okay, Emad, let me put it to you from the US president's perspective, given that he's in his final year, and this is a legacy issue for him. He needs to save face in many ways. No matter what the Iranians do, whether it's within Syria or whether it's more ballistic missile tests, he's not going to dismantle the nuclear deal, is he? Because this is a legacy project for him. Doesn't that embolden the Iranians to do whatever they want to, Emad?
Well, let's please understand one major point. I mean, yes, it could be a legacy issue, but this, again, was not a unilateral deal between the United States and Iran. The nuclear deal is multilateral, so there's a lot of world powers that also signed on to this deal. So it is the credibility of the United States in terms of continuing to abide by this nuclear accord for its own, standing globally. So it will be very unlikely President Obama or whoever, comes into office next year would not be able to just tear out this agreement. And I will go back and say to Sohrab that this deal was negotiated in good faith for over 2 years. And it led to this, constraints on Iran's nuclear program. And that has stopped Iran on every pathway towards a nuclear weapon.
Okay.
So that's good news for the region. And so we have to acknowledge that. Now, secondly, in terms of, on a regional perspective, because yes, there is animosity between Tehran, Riyadh, and Tel Aviv and other capitals. There needs to be a collective move towards a more regional security apparatus that addresses bilateral and multilateral issues of defense and security amongst these countries, because when they are not talking to each other and are showing and bolstering animosity, of course there's going to be further escalation of conflicts in the region that is already going on.
Okay, one final question for Sohrab, because we are running out of time. Sohrab, aren't you afraid that you're going to be on the wrong side of history, given that the moderates are doing well within Iran? It's a very flawed system, but they did well in recent elections. The president, for all intents and purposes, is a moderate. Isn't it better to encourage the moderates and strengthen them and ignore the bluster from the hardliners? Might you not be on the wrong side of history here, Sohrab? Final answer.
Well, look, I mean, first of all, the history is already vindicating me and other critics of the deal who said that if you strike too lenient of a deal, doesn't matter if it took 12 years. The fact is that the Iranians stood their ground on almost everything, and the West collapsed, whether it's on the issue of not including ballistic missile testing in the structure of the deal, or the fact that various terrorists who were on various blacklists because of their non-nuclear terrorist activity were removed as a result of the deal from those lists. All of these concessions are already showing their fruit in the form of Iran's rotten behavior in the region.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap. Unfortunately, I have to end this. But gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Sohrab Ahmari and Emad Kiyaei, thank you very much for joining us. Still to come on the Newsmakers, why German Chancellor Angela Merkel has been having a difficult day. And in Picture This, a moment of truth for Syria. Can leaders end the diplomatic gridlock and end the fighting? German Chancellor Angela Merkel has reacted to the devastating losses suffered by her party, calling it a difficult day after the right-wing anti-immigration AfD made significant gains in Germany's state elections. Europe's strongwoman has seen her popularity slide as refugees continue to arrive in Germany following her party's so-called open-door policy. Most Germans remain in favor of accepting refugees, but the rise of the AfD has reshaped the country's political landscape and unsettled Merkel's fragile coalition. The Newsmaker's Sandra Gatman has the details.
She's known as Europe's most powerful leader and Germany's mother figure. She's become a hero to millions of asylum seekers arriving in Europe.
I love Merkel. I love you, Merkel. I love you, Merkel.
But at home, Angela Merkel's grip on her party and popularity is slipping, the blame falling largely on her handling of the refugee crisis. Sunday's regional elections saw her Christian Democratic Union lose support across the board, with voters heading in opposite directions. The anti-immigrant AfD party saw huge gains in all 3 states, entering parliaments there for the first time. Even the Greens trumped Merkel's party, winning more than 32% in Baden-Württemberg.
The overall and dominating topic was refugees and the refugee policy, and the fact that people believe this issue has not yet been solved satisfactorily influenced the elections very strongly.
The German press called it a devastating defeat for the ruling CDU, whose response to the refugee crisis has polarized Germany. It was Angela Merkel who declared that Germany's doors were open to all refugees. But the warm welcome was short-lived. After more than 1.1 million asylum seekers arrived in Germany last year, forcing the Chancellor to U-turn her policy to secure Europe's borders. But anti-immigration groups want to permanently close Germany's borders to refugees amid fears of cultural differences.
It's the catastrophic policies of Chancellor Merkel which clearly opened people's eyes. This is the only reason why we succeeded in entering all state parliaments with two-digit figures.
It's the loudest signal yet that Germany's so-called Willkommenskultur, or welcome culture, has begun to fade for some. Germany's political landscape appears more fragmented than at any time since after World War II. The far-right AfD is now a formidable party, and its appeal continues to grow. The ruling Conservatives could also crumble from within, with some CDU members criticizing Merkel for driving her refugee policy like a dictatorship. With her personal fate at stake, all eyes will be on her next policy moves. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss if Merkel's refugee policy proved a political winner for her rivals is Thorsten Benner, Director of the Global Public Policy Institute in Berlin. Thanks for joining us, sir. Has she committed political suicide?
No, I don't think so that Ms. Merkel has committed political suicide. She's now paying a price, not just for her refugee policy, but I think for her overall policy to shift her party, the Christian Democrats, further to the left, to win Green voters, to win Social Democratic voters. She has occupied these themes, these topics in the center. Until now, she hasn't paid a political price for this. Last year, people were still talking, early last year, about the CDU winning an absolute majority. Now it's being clear that through the refugee issue, disgruntled voters have found a new home that is to the right of the Christian Democrats, the Alternative for Germany party.
The AfD, the Alternative for Germany party that you mentioned, they did very well. They got 3 states. Do we need some perspective before we get worried about them doing well? Or is there something to be worried about?
No, it's definitely something to be worried about. I mean, today marks Germany's arrival as a normal country in Western Europe. Most of Germany's neighbors have right-wing populist parties that have between 15 and 25% of the vote. Take the Front National in France or the right-wing parties in Austria and in other Scandinavian countries. Germany has been blessed with the absence of these right-wing populist parties until now, which has made policymaking a lot more rational because mainstream parties didn't have to kind of preemptively try to adopt policies of the right-wing populists to try to preempt them. But with today, I think you see that there is a right-wing populist party in Germany that has established itself, and we should be worried because this may lead some not so calm mainstream politicians. I don't think it will affect Angela Merkel so much in the short term, but longer term, you'll see more people like Horst Seehofer, her rival from Bavaria, who are very nervous, who don't have a consistent line, and who will try to kind of preemptively adapt some of the crazy policies that are being suggested by the right-wing populists.
She has used multiple reasons to justify her refugee and migrant policy. She's used moral reasons, humanitarian reasons, economic reasons as well. Can we say that by and large Germans have rejected that reasoning? They don't buy it?
First of all, the main reason you didn't mention, which is Europe. The main motivation for the refugee policy Angela Merkel has adopted is to save Europe. In her opinion, last September, Europe was on the verge of collapse with all these migrants moving freely through Europe, with Hungary not being willing to accept them. We were on the verge of a humanitarian crisis, and Angela Merkel accepted these refugees into Germany, and Austria did the same in order to give Europe some breathing space to get organized, to secure its external borders, to perhaps cut a deal with Turkey. So that's the main reason for her policies, and it's important to recognize that.
Thorsten Benner, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. In today's Picture This, the UN Special Envoy for Syria has said if the latest round of peace talks in Geneva fail, the only plan B is a return to war. World powers are meeting once again to try to find a peaceful solution to the conflict, which is now entering its 6th year. Today's newsmaker has been Iran. The country's recent launch of ballistic missiles has thrown doubts on whether Iran really has turned over a new leaf after the nuclear deal. Although the launches don't break the terms of the deal, they will turn the heat up for US President Barack Obama. Critics say his administration has been duped by Iran, who never intended to reform. He's now trying to reassure his allies in the Gulf and Israel that the deal with Tehran will stop them building nuclear weapons. But with Western countries calling for fresh sanctions on Iran and fears of a regional arms race with Saudi Arabia, could Barack Obama's much-lauded foreign policy triumph be turning into one of his greatest foreign policy failures? You've been watching this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. As always, thank you for watching. See you soon. Bye-bye.